The moment I realized my son wasn't coming back, I didn't yell. I didn't chase his car. I just stood there, holding an empty jacket pocket, watching families walk past me like I didn't exist. No wallet, no phone, no ID, no cues. At 64 years old, I had never felt so small. That's when a voice beside me said quietly, "Son, you look like a man who's just been erased." I turned. An old man I'd never seen before was smiling at me. And then he said something that made my stomach drop. "Pretend you're my son, just for tonight." I never thought I'd be the kind of father who would get a call like that. "Dad," my son said, his voice unusually warm, "I messed up missing your birthday. Let me make it right. I booked us a short trip, just you and me." At my age, you learn not to expect much. So when something good shows up, you don't question it too hard. You take it while it's still offered. I told myself this was Ethan trying to be a better son, trying to reconnect before it was too late. He picked me up that morning right on time. New car, clean, smelled like money and ambition. He barely looked at me when I got in, but I ignored that too. Hope can make you polite about red flags. On the drive to the airport, I talked. About nothing important. Old stories, little memories. The kind fathers tell when they're nervous the silence might turn permanent. Ethan answered in short bursts. His eyes stayed on the road, or his phone. At one red light, he sighed and said, "Dad, can you put your bag and backpack in the trunk? Airport's crazy today." I hesitated. That backpack had everything: wallet, phone, ID, keys, my whole life, zipped up. But this was my son. I handed it over. As we pulled into the drop-off lane, he said, "Just grab your duffel. I'll park and meet you inside." He didn't wait for me to answer. And as I closed the door, watching his car roll forward, I felt something small and cold settle in my chest. I didn't know yet that I had just agreed to be left behind. The first 10 minutes felt normal. Too normal. We stood near the check-in counters, while travelers rushed past us, dragging suitcases and impatience. I kept scanning the crowd, expecting to see Ethan walking toward me, phone in hand, annoyed at airport parking like everyone else. He didn't show. I told myself he was circling the garage. Then I told myself traffic was worse than usual. Then I stopped telling myself anything at all. After 20 minutes, I checked the departure board just to look busy. Vancouver, on time. Gate not assigned yet. I reached for my phone to text him. My pocket was empty. I patted the other pocket, then the inside of my jacket, then my back pocket. Slow at first, then faster, then frantic. My heart started pounding in a way I hadn't felt since my construction days, when something heavy slipped and you knew you had 1 second to react or get crushed. The phone wasn't there. Neither was my wallet. That's when memory hit me clear and sharp. The backpack. The one Ethan asked me to put in the trunk. The one holding my ID, my credit cards, the cash I kept folded behind my license, my apartment keys, my spare bus pass. Everything that proved I existed. I stood there, frozen, staring at my hands like they belonged to someone else. "This can't be right," I muttered. I walked to the curb, craning my neck, searching for his car. Every sedan looked wrong. Every minute stretched longer than the last. An hour passed. Families checked in together. Couples laughed. Sons carried their father's bags. Mine had taken mine and disappeared. That's when the truth finally settled in. He wasn't parking. He wasn't delayed. He was gone. And I had no idea what I was going to do next. I waited longer than I should have. That's the part that still embarrasses me. I stood there like a man afraid to admit the truth, checking the curb every time a car slowed down, convincing myself that the next one would be his. I kept thinking, any second now, because once you admit your own son abandoned you, there's no pretending left. After about an hour, an airline employee finally approached me. "Sir, are you checking in?" she asked kindly. "I'm waiting for my son," I said. The words tasted strange, smaller than they should have. She nodded, polite but uninterested, and moved on. To her, I was just another older man standing in the way. That's when airport security noticed me. He was younger than my son. Clean uniform, professional voice. "Sir, you can't stay inside the terminal unless you have a boarding pass or ID." "I had both," I said quietly. "My son has them." The officer's expression shifted not to anger, but to something worse. Pity. He asked me to step outside while I sorted things out. I wanted to argue. I wanted to explain. But how do you explain that the person who was supposed to protect you is the one who erased you? Outside, the air felt colder. I sat on a metal bench with my hands folded, watching cars pull up and drive away. People hugged, laughed, complained about baggage fees. No one looked at me twice. That's when it hit me not just that I was stranded, but that I didn't matter to the one person who should have cared the most. And for the first time, I wondered if this was how my life was going to end. Right there, unclaimed. I tried to explain myself to the security officer. I really did. But every sentence sounded ridiculous the moment it left my mouth. My son took my wallet. My son drove away. My son left me here. The officer listened patiently, but rules don't bend for heartbreak. Sir, without ID you can't remain in the terminal, he said. I'll need you to step outside. Outside? That word carried more weight than it should have. He walked me through the sliding doors like I was being escorted out of a place I no longer belonged. The sound of rolling suitcases faded behind me. The warmth disappeared. All that remained was concrete, exhaust fumes, and a bench that felt colder than it looked. Do you have someone you can call? The officer asked. I almost laughed. My phone was gone. My brother lived across the country. Most of my old friends were either dead or drifting. When you stop working, you slowly stop existing to people. I'll figure something out, I said. That was a lie, too. When the officer left, I sat there staring at my hands. They were rough, scarred, still strong for their age. Hands that had built houses, poured foundations, paid for school lunches, patched scraped knees. And now they were empty. I checked my pockets again, even though I knew better. Old habits die hard. So does hope. A shuttle bus passed, then another. Time stretched in strange ways. I wasn't hungry. I wasn't tired. I was hollow. The worst part wasn't being stranded. It was realizing my son hadn't just left me without money or ID. He had left me without dignity. And as the sun shifted overhead, I wondered how long a man could sit in one place before the world decided he no longer mattered at all. I don't know how long I sat there. Time behaves differently when you have nowhere to go. Minutes stretch. Sounds blur together. The airport became a loop. Cars arriving, cars leaving, people hugging, people arguing, people living lives that no longer included me. A family stopped a few feet away. Grandparents, parents, kids. The father lifted a suitcase like it weighed nothing. The son complained about the cold. The mother laughed and fixed his collar. No one noticed the old man on the bench. That hurt more than I expected. I'd spent most of my life being useful, needed. On job sites, if I didn't show up, things slowed down. At home, if I didn't work, bills didn't get paid. Even after my wife died, I told myself I still mattered because my son existed. Now I wasn't so sure. I replayed the last few years with Ethan in my head, looking for signs. The way he rushed our phone calls. How he'd flinch when I showed up to places underdressed. The way he introduced me by my first name instead of calling me his father. I thought it was busyness. I thought it was stress. I thought it was temporary. Turns out, shame is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It just waits for the right moment to push you aside. I rubbed my hands together to keep them warm. They trembled slightly, and I hated that. I wasn't weak. I wasn't helpless. But sitting there with no money, no ID, no proof I belonged anywhere, I finally understood something terrifying. You don't become invisible all at once. You fade. And if no one reaches for you while you're fading, you disappear completely. That's when a shadow stopped in front of me, and a voice I didn't recognize said, Son, you've been sitting here a long time. I looked up slowly. An older man stood in front of me, blocking the sun just enough to cast a long shadow over my knees. He was dressed better than anyone I'd seen all day. Dark coat, pressed slacks, shoes polished like they were cared for by habit, not vanity. A cane rested lightly in his hand, more companion than support. I'm fine, I said automatically. It was the kind of answer you give strangers so they'll leave you alone. He didn't move. No, he replied calmly. You're not. That caught me off guard. Not the words, the certainty behind them. He nodded toward the empty space beside me. May I? I shrugged. He sat, slow and deliberate, like someone who had learned not to rush time anymore. We watched cars pull up and drive away. A silence settled between us, but it wasn't awkward. It was observant, patient. Waiting for someone? He asked. My son, I said before I could stop myself. The man didn't react, didn't offer sympathy, just absorbed it. He left, I added, with my wallet, my phone, everything. The words felt heavier when spoken out loud. Like once they existed in the air, they couldn't be taken back. I see, he said softly. I expected advice, or pity, or one of those useless comments people make when they don't know what to say. Instead, he surprised me. You live far from here? He asked. 20 miles, I said. Maybe more. He nodded again, tapping his cane once against the ground. That's a long walk, he said. Then, after a pause, I might have a solution, but you'll think I'm crazy. I let out a tired breath. At this point, I said, crazy might be an improvement. He turned to me then, eyes sharp despite his age. Good, he said, because what I'm about to ask will change your day. Possibly more than that. He waited until a black sedan pulled up to the curb a few yards away before speaking again. My driver will be here in a moment, he said. Before that happens, I want to ask you something. You're free to say no. I didn't answer. I'd learned that day silence was safer than assumptions. My name is Samuel, he continued. Samuel Whitmore. And I need someone to pretend to be my son for a few hours. I turned to him slowly, convinced I'd misheard. I'm sorry, I said. My son passed away years ago, he said, matter of fact. Since then, I've been surrounded by people who smile too much and listen too carefully. People who want something. I let out a short laugh. You picked the wrong man. I don't even have a phone. That's exactly why I picked you, Samuel said. He leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice. Tonight there's a dinner at my house. My lawyer, a relative. People who believe they understand my future better than I do. I shook my head. This is a mistake. I'm not asking you to lie about who you are, he interrupted gently. Just to sit beside me. To let them think I'm not as alone as they assume. I stared at him, trying to decide if this was desperation or manipulation. And in exchange? I asked. Samuel met my eyes. A ride home, a new phone, cash. Enough to get you back on your feet. The sedan's engine idled nearby. You can walk away, he said. Or you can get in that car and help an old man test the truth about the people in his life. I looked at the road, then back at the airport, then at the stranger who'd seen me when no one else did, and I realized something unsettling. For the first time that day, someone was offering me a choice. I didn't answer right away. I watched the sedan instead. Black paint, tinted windows, the kind of car that didn't belong in drop-off lanes unless it was waiting for someone important. The driver stood nearby, pretending not to listen. Why me? I asked finally. Samuel didn't hesitate. Because you didn't ask me who I was, he said. You didn't ask how much I was worth. You didn't ask what you'd get beyond getting home. He rested both hands on the top of his cane. That tells me more than most resumes ever could. I looked down at my shoes, scuffed, old, honest. I'm not an actor, I said. I don't know how to play rich families and fancy dinners. Good, Samuel replied. I'm not looking for a performance. I'm looking for presence. He took a slow breath. My son died 15 years ago. After that, everyone decided I was unfinished business. Relatives I barely remembered started calling. Advisors became friendlier. Concern showed up exactly where money lived. I swallowed. And you want to see who drops the act? Yes, he said quietly. And I want to see who panics. The word hung between us. If I bring home a son, Samuel continued, even a borrowed one, people will reveal themselves. They always do. I leaned back against the bench, feeling the weight of the day press down on me. This wasn't just strange. It was dangerous. Emotional games around money always were. And after tonight? I asked. After tonight, you're free, Samuel said. With more than you had this morning. The driver cleared his throat, subtle but deliberate. Samuel stood slowly and extended his hand. I won't insult you by begging, he said. But I will tell you this loneliness makes men do reckless things. I'd rather be reckless with someone honest. I looked at his hand. Then I thought about the long walk home, and the empty pockets, and the son who'd already decided I didn't matter. I stood up. Just tonight, I said. Samuel smiled, not wide, not triumphant. Relieved. Of course, he said. That's how all-important things begin. The ride felt unreal. The city slid past the window like something I'd already left behind. Storefronts gave way to quiet streets, then to neighborhoods where trees arched over the road like they were protecting secrets. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Samuel finally broke the silence. You can stop this at any time, he said, even at the front door. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I believed him or myself. When the car turned into a long, curved driveway, my chest tightened. The house at the end wasn't just big. It was the kind of place you see in magazines and assume no real person lives there. Brick, stone, warm lights, glowing behind tall windows. The driver opened my door. I hesitated. For a moment, I saw myself reflected in the glass, an old man in worn shoes, carrying a duffel bag that had seen better decades. I didn't belong here. Every instinct told me that. Samuel noticed. Homes don't reject people, he said quietly. People do. Inside, the air smelled like polish and something faintly floral. A woman appeared almost instantly, her posture stiffening the second she saw me. Mr. Whitmore, she said. Then her eyes moved to me. Confusion flickered across her face. Samuel didn't pause. Margaret, he said calmly, this is David, my son. The word landed heavy. I felt it settle somewhere deep in my chest, a place that hadn't been named in years. Margaret's smile froze, then rearranged itself into something polite and strained. Your son. Yes, Samuel replied. He'll be staying for dinner. As she turned to lead us inside, Samuel leaned closer to me and whispered, just be yourself. I almost laughed. I wasn't sure I remembered how. And as I followed him deeper into that quiet, expensive house, one thought kept circling my mind. Whatever was waiting at that dinner table, this was no longer just about getting home. The dining room could have seated 12. Only 4 places were set. Samuel took the head of the table. He gestured for me to sit on his right. That alone felt deliberate, like a statement made without words. They'll be here any minute, he said calmly. They? I asked. My lawyer, Samuel replied, and a nephew who's been very attentive lately. That told me everything I needed to know. The doorbell rang almost on cue. A thin man in an expensive suit entered first, his smile already prepared. Behind him was a younger man, well-dressed, confident. The kind of confidence that comes from assuming the future belongs to you. Both stopped when they saw me. The lawyer recovered first. Samuel, he said carefully, I wasn't aware you had company. Samuel smiled. Gerald, this is David. My son. Silence fell hard. The nephew's eyes flicked to me, then back to Samuel, calculating, adjusting. Your son? He said, forcing a laugh. But I thought. You thought what you were told, Samuel replied evenly. Sit. Let's eat. Dinner moved slowly. Too slowly. Gerald asked questions disguised as conversation. Where was I from? What did I do? How long had I known Samuel? Each one felt like a probe, not curiosity. I answered simply. Truthfully. Construction. Retired. Met Samuel today. The nephew's jaw tightened with every answer. So, he said finally, swirling his wine, after all these years, you just show up? I met his gaze. Sometimes, I said, it takes losing everything to remember what matters. Samuel placed his hand over mine. Well said, son. Across the table, I saw it clearly now. They weren't angry. They were afraid. And for the first time since the airport, I realized something had shifted. I wasn't the one on the outside anymore. Dinner ended without anyone saying what they were really thinking. That's how people like them operate. They don't explode. They store things. Save them for later, when lawyers and paperwork can do the damage quietly. After dessert, Gerald excused himself with a tight smile and a promise to follow up. The nephew lingered, pretending to admire the artwork on the walls, though his eyes kept drifting back to me like I was a stain he couldn't scrub out. You must have had quite a life, he said casually. Construction, you mentioned? Yes, I replied. 35 years. He nodded slowly. Hard work. The way he said it made it sound like a condition. Something unfortunate but contagious. Samuel watched the exchange without intervening. I realized then this wasn't just about them revealing themselves. It was about seeing what I would do when tested. I didn't defend myself. Didn't justify my life. Didn't explain why my hands were rough or my clothes plain. I'd earned every callous. When the nephew finally left, the house fell quiet again. Too quiet. You did well, Samuel said once we were alone. I didn't do anything, I replied. Exactly, he said. You didn't shrink. You didn't perform. You didn't beg. He looked tired now, older than he had at the airport. The bravado was gone, replaced by something more fragile. They see money as proof of worth, he continued. You remind them that it isn't. I didn't know what to say to that. I just stood there, suddenly aware that this night this strange borrowed role had already gone further than planned. And as Samuel slowly made his way toward the sitting room, he said something that stayed with me. "People like them fear men like you," he said quietly, "because you can't be bought." That's when I understood. Whatever game Samuel was playing, it wasn't just theirs to lose anymore. We sat in the sitting room with the lights low. Samuel lowered himself into a chair across from me, his cane resting against the armrest. For the first time since we met, he looked exhausted not physically, but emotionally, like a man who had been holding something in for too long. "I wasn't entirely honest with you earlier," he said. I waited. "My son didn't just pass away," he continued. "He left first. He stared at the fireplace, unlit. We argued. I wanted him to take over my business. He wanted a different life. I told him if he walked out, he wasn't my son anymore." The words hung heavy between us. "He died 3 years later," Samuel said quietly. And those were the last words he ever heard from me. I felt my throat tighten. "I can't change that," he went on. "But tonight I wanted to see what it felt like to have a son sit across from me again, even for a moment." He finally looked at me. "Thank you for giving an old man that." And in that moment, I knew this was no longer a transaction. It was a confession. I was supposed to leave that night. That was the agreement. One dinner, one favor. Then Samuel would send me home with a phone, some cash, and a strange story no one would ever believe. Instead, he lingered in the sitting room, staring at the dark window like he was afraid of what waited on the other side of sleep. "It's late," I said carefully. "I can call a cab once." "No," Samuel interrupted, not sharply but firmly. "Stay." The word carried more weight than it should have. "You don't have keys," he continued. "You don't have a phone. And he hesitated. "I don't enjoy sleeping in this house alone." That honesty caught me off guard. Margaret appeared quietly, as if she'd been listening from the hallway. She looked from Samuel to me, reading the room. "The guest room is ready," she said. Not a question. I nodded before I could overthink it. The guest room was bigger than my entire apartment. Clean lines, heavy curtains, a bed that looked like it had never been slept in out of loneliness, only habit. Fresh clothes were laid out neatly at the foot of the bed. My size. I didn't ask how Samuel knew. Later, lying awake, I stared at the ceiling and listened to the house settle. Pipes ticking, distant footsteps, a building learning it wasn't empty tonight. I thought about my son, about the airport, about how quickly dignity can be taken, and how quietly it can be returned. In the next room, an old man slept, a little easier, believing he wasn't alone. And somewhere between those thoughts, something shifted. This wasn't charity. This was two men, both abandoned in different ways, choosing not to disappear that night. And I had a feeling morning would complicate everything. The next morning, the house felt different. Not warmer, more alert, like it knew it was being watched. Samuel and I had breakfast in near silence, not uncomfortable, thoughtful. He read the paper. I drank coffee that probably cost more than my grocery budget for a week. Around 10, the doorbell rang. Samuel didn't look surprised. "That will be Gerald," he said calmly. The lawyer arrived with a smile that didn't bother pretending anymore. Behind him, the nephew followed, jaw tight, eyes sharp. "This won't take long," Gerald said, glancing at me before addressing Samuel. "We need to discuss some developments." Samuel gestured toward the sitting room. "Then speak." Gerald cleared his throat. "There are concerns. About your guest. About undue influence." The nephew crossed his arms. "This man shows up out of nowhere, stays the night, suddenly has access to you." "I'm sitting right here," I said evenly. He ignored me. Samuel did not. "This man," Samuel said, his voice steady, "has asked for nothing." Gerald frowned. "That may be, but perception matters. People talk. They question your judgment." Samuel leaned forward slightly. "Let them." The nephew scoffed. "You're making a mistake. Blood matters." Samuel's eyes hardened. "So does character." The room went quiet. I felt it then, the shift. This wasn't curiosity anymore. This was fear. The kind that shows up when control starts slipping. Gerald gathered his papers slowly. "We'll revisit this," he said, formally. After they left, the silence returned heavier than before. "I'm sorry," I said. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." Samuel waved it off. "You didn't." He looked at me, something resolute settling into his expression. "They revealed themselves sooner than I expected," he said. "I didn't know what that meant yet. But I had the unsettling feeling that whatever Samuel was planning, it was no longer theoretical, and it was going to change more than just my situation. That afternoon, Samuel went to rest. The house grew quiet again, but this time it wasn't empty. It felt thoughtful, like the walls were holding onto conversations they weren't ready to release. I wandered into the back garden, hands in my pockets, staring at hedges trimmed by people who had never worried about rent. The air smelled clean, expensive somehow, and still my chest felt tight. I couldn't stop thinking about my son, about how easily he'd driven away, about how carefully he'd planned it, about the way shame had outweighed love. I replayed every moment of his childhood, searching for the mistake that mattered most. Had I pushed too hard? Not enough? Had I embarrassed him without knowing? Or had he simply grown into someone who believed appearances were more important than people? The truth sat heavy. I had spent years measuring my worth by how useful I was, how much I provided, how quiet I stayed. Maybe that taught him something I never intended. From the garden, I could see the guest room window, the room I'd slept in, borrowed comfort, borrowed belonging. Inside that house, Samuel was dying. Inside me, something else was. I realized then that being abandoned hadn't hurt the most. What hurt was knowing my son had been carrying that decision for a long time. He hadn't panicked. He had chosen. As the sun dipped lower, my thoughts were interrupted by a sound I hadn't heard all day. A phone ringing. Not mine. Samuel's. And for reasons I couldn't explain, my heart began to race. Because deep down, I already knew who it was. And whatever he was about to say would decide whether I was still a father or just a man who used to be one. Samuel's phone stopped ringing before I could say anything. A minute passed. Then it rang again. He answered this time, his voice low, measured. I couldn't hear the other side, but I didn't need to. I knew that silence, the kind filled with regret that arrives late and speaks softly. Samuel glanced at me from across the room. "It's for you," he said. My chest tightened. "I don't have—" "He asked for you," Samuel interrupted gently. I took the phone. "Dad?" Ethan's voice cracked through the speaker. "Dad, please, don't hang up." I closed my eyes. "I went back," he said quickly, "to the airport. You weren't there. Security told me." I didn't think. "No," I said quietly. "You did think. That's what hurts." Silence. Then I was ashamed, he admitted. Vanessa's parents were coming. They judge everything. The way you dress, the way you talk. I panicked. I thought I could fix it later. "By erasing me," I said. "I didn't mean—" "But you did," I cut in. My voice didn't rise. That scared him more than anger ever could. "You didn't forget me, Ethan. You chose yourself." He started crying, full, ugly sobs. "I'm sorry," he said. "I don't deserve forgiveness. But please, tell me where you are. Let me come get you." I looked at Samuel. He didn't interfere, just watched. "I'm safe," I said, "but I'm not ready to see you." "Dad, you need to sit with what you did," I finished, "the way I've been sitting with it." I handed the phone back. My hands were shaking. Samuel met my eyes. "You were honest," he said, and for the first time I believed honesty might hurt less than silence. But I also knew something else. This wasn't over. Not for him, not for me, and not for the choices that still waited ahead. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of the bed, it was comfortable enough to make me feel guilty, but because my mind wouldn't stop replaying my son's voice. Not the crying part, the hesitation before it, the pause where he weighed truth against convenience. That pause told me everything. I sat in the dark, listening to the house breathe. Somewhere down the hall, Samuel coughed softly, the sound thin but stubborn. Two men awake in the same house for different reasons, both thinking about sons who hadn't shown up when it mattered. In the morning, Samuel looked worse, not weak resolved. "I've made a decision," he said over breakfast, folding his newspaper carefully. "One I should have made years ago." I didn't ask what it was. I'd learned that men like Samuel spoke when they were ready. "I won't punish people for wanting money," he continued, "but I will stop rewarding them for pretending to care." He looked at me then, really looked at me. "You could have leveraged everything you learned here," he said. "Sympathy, guilt, opportunity. You didn't." "I didn't come for anything," I replied. "That," Samuel said, "is exactly why you stayed." Later that afternoon, Gerald called again, more polite, more careful. Samuel listened, then ended the call without argument. They're afraid now, he said calmly. Fear makes people reveal their true priorities. I thought of my son, of how fear had made him abandon me instead of standing beside me. Justice, I realized, didn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it showed up quietly, in who still had access to you, and who no longer did. And I sensed that whatever Samuel had decided next wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity. And clarity, once reached, couldn't be undone. Samuel asked me to sit with him in the study that evening. The room smelled like old books and polished wood, the kind of place where decisions were made slowly and lived with forever. A folder lay open on the desk between us. Legal paper. Clean. Final. I'm changing my will, he said, as if he were telling me the weather. I felt my shoulders tense. Samuel, I don't want to be involved in that. You already are, he replied gently. Not because you asked, because you existed. He slid the folder closer to me, but didn't open it further. Most of my estate is going where it should have gone years ago, into something meaningful. A foundation. My son's name. His unfinished life. I nodded. That made sense. Then he continued. The house, he said, pausing, watching my reaction. I'm leaving it to you. I stood up so fast the chair scraped loudly against the floor. No, I said immediately. Absolutely not. I won't be the reason your family tears itself apart. Samuel didn't raise his voice. He didn't rush me. They were already tearing it apart, he said calmly. You just made it visible. I shook my head. I came here with nothing. I don't deserve... This isn't a reward, he interrupted. It's a responsibility. He looked around the room. This house doesn't need another owner who sees it as leverage. It needs someone who understands what it means to be left behind. I thought of the bench, the airport, my empty pockets. There are conditions, Samuel added. You live here. You don't sell it. And you keep one room ready. For what? I asked quietly. For the next man who thinks his life is over. I sat back down, my legs weak. Samuel leaned back, exhausted but peaceful. I couldn't save my son, he said, but I can make sure his absence doesn't create more damage. I understood then. This wasn't generosity. It was legacy. And it terrified me. The meeting happened the next morning. Lawyers, papers. Raised voices kept carefully polite. Accusations came fast. Undue influence, manipulation, confusion. Words meant to scare an old man into retreat. Samuel didn't flinch. I was evaluated, he said calmly. 3 times. I know exactly what I'm doing. Silence followed. When the will was read, faces tightened. Calculations shifted. Futures quietly collapsed. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in my life, something extraordinary happened. I was chosen not because I asked, not because I fought, but because I didn't. And that truth was impossible for them to undo. Samuel passed away 6 weeks later, quietly, in his sleep, in a house that no longer felt empty. The lawyers did what lawyers do. The objections came. The threats followed. Time dragged things out longer than grief ever should. But the decision held. It always does when it's made for the right reasons. I stayed, not because of the house, because of the promise. Some nights, I sit in the guest room with the light on low, just listening. The same room where I once slept, believing my life was over. I keep it ready, clean, quiet, waiting. My son comes by now, slowly, carefully. We don't pretend everything's fixed. We talk, we listen. That's enough for now. And every so often I think about the airport bench, about how close I came to disappearing. If you're listening to this and something in it feels familiar, maybe it's because you've carried more than you ever said out loud. Maybe you've been overlooked, or underestimated, or quietly replaced. If so, know this. Your story isn't finished. Not yet. Sometimes life doesn't fix things loudly. Sometimes it just places the right person beside you, and waits to see what you do with that chance. If this story stayed with you, you're the kind of listener these stories are written for, and there are more waiting when you're ready to hear them. Take care of yourself. And if you ever feel invisible, remember, someone, somewhere, is still capable of seeing you.